Everyone, welcome to the Beyond the Externals podcast, where we discuss mindset and leadership within the world of sports. This podcast is hosted by myself, Dr. Cassie Preston, a mental performance coach and founder of CP Mindset, and Chris DiPiero, who has spent the past 30 plus years in the game of hockey from the NHL on down, including where he coached me back in my junior days. And now we get to work together in the mental performance and leadership space. Today's episode, we're going particularly teammate leadership, Chris. And particularly, let's frame it as champion teammate, right? And one of our former guests, John O'Sullivan, comes back on. Him and Jerry Lynch wrote a great book, very practical, about the podcast, about the book itself. Any first high-level thoughts, and then we'll dive into some more nitty-gritty of what readers can and listeners, can expect from this podcast episode.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, as you mentioned, John is a repeat guest. What's nice about John, I think he comes at this audience from a different lens and a different viewpoint in terms of his experiences, as a coach, but soccer, high performance soccer, youth soccer, but he's been in the youth leadership space for years. And so I think his insights, his experiences, the way he articulates, I think, was excellent. The neat thing is, in terms of, we talked to him about, why creating a book on, champion teammates. And so he talked about that in, the idea of what, good teammates are. And it really, right from the introduction of the book itself, where he talks about the difference in the 2022 Men's World Cup in Qatar between Cristiano Ronaldo and his impact, and his how he was a teammate on the Portuguese team, and Lionel Messi and his impact and being a champion teammate with Argentina, who ended up going on to win the World Cup. So I thought that was a great way to just for the intro for the book, but also to start off the podcast. How about yourself? What were your initial takeaways?
Yeah, I think there's lots of good stuff. The book itself is just so practical. And you think also Jerry Lynch and John together, like they just spent so many years in the high performance leadership, culture, particularly space. And they were able to pool all of their experiences together into this practical book. And particularly, I think, Jerry's written already 17 books, and John's experience really kind of goes beyond the X and O's. And one of the top things for me were the difference of being a champion versus becoming a champion, and making it more about this active thing that you're doing and being. And one of the foundational things with that was having the narrative switch for athletes, for coaches, for themselves, but even just saying it with their athletes, from what can I get to what can I give? And when we look at giving, that actually makes us feel better. And I talked about it and brought it up. They used I think it was the Viktor Frankl quote from the Man's Search for Meaning in Life, that about those that give dealt with the adversity better than those that were trying to how do I get my take and what's for me? It actually serves the individual at a greater level. So there's all kinds of great little nuggets from different experts and experiences that they've had. Sorry, some of my throat there, but that's really helped them make it a very easable and digestible book for athletes particularly, but for coaches as well. And it's a great opportunity for coaches to even, hey, maybe this is a book, I've got my upcoming book, or right now this is a great book to maybe walk through with your team. They do bulk orders and that kind of stuff. So lots of other ones. I got a couple other I want to share. Any final ones from your end that you really enjoyed and liked from our episode?
Yeah, I think what's as you mentioned, I think it's great for both coaches and athletes, even parents as well, because at the end of each chapter, there's some questions and kind of you can kind of fill in and answer some questions, based on that chapter itself. What I think was important for me, and I kind of talked about it in one of my questions for John, was this kind of thread through the course of the book, and obviously their experiences of, Steve Kerr, Coach Pop in San Antonio, and just that kind of connection. And Steve Kerr had played for Pop in San Antonio, won championships there. And what's interesting at the time, that we're recording, that there's the NBA Hall of Fame our basketball Hall of Fame was ceremonies were on the weekend, and Popovich had a couple of his athletes and a former assistant coach, as well as himself, being inducted into the basketball Hall of Fame. And I think it's important to understand that idea, like you say, of the Viktor Frankl quote in terms of being able to give. And I think if you listen to some of the narratives that you can find about Kerr and Popovich, it's really about service and that idea. So if teammates can understand that from a standpoint of being of service, then they'll be on their way to being champion teammates. And I think John articulates that well. So good book. I thought it was a great discussion. And I'll throw it back to you.
Yeah, no, appreciate it. And I think one of the other little nuggets we dive into at some point was just like having the standards for who do you want to be. Then there's rules for what you're going to do as a coach and as a team. And then there's your goals that you want to achieve. But it starts with like, how do you want to show up? What are the standards you're setting for yourself and how we operate, who we're being in the values. So again, tons of nuggets, listen through, encourage, the listeners to buy the book. This is a great episode for coaches to share with their team, as usual. Now, make sure you like, subscribe, reach out with any questions. Obviously, you're interested in mental performance coaching, for teams, coaches, athletes, reach out, find us at cpmindset.com, and enjoy the episode as we keep going beyond the X's and O's. All right, John, thanks for coming back on the Beyond the X and O's podcast. Welcome.
Cass and Chris, thank you guys.
I want to just dive right into the book. I really enjoyed reading it. Thought it was really well done. And maybe just a high level look, like what drove you? Why did you write this book with Jerry? Like what's the origins from it? I know it's probably a long time coming. You've got other books and Jerry's got lots of books. What's maybe a little backstory here first before we dive into the concepts?
Yeah. It was a book that we first talked about writing together a couple of years ago. And I don't know, a few things happened in the world like COVID and all that just kind of put the kibosh on it. And we decided to, do some other things, running virtual conferences, things like that. But we had this idea, and I always had a folder in my inbox, called like New Book with Jerry. And then, at the end of 2022, we both had some time. We weren't on the road. We didn't have Jerry had a project, but I didn't. And I just said, hey, should we do this? And writing a book, we each had books about coaching and parenting and all this stuff. But we don't have a book about being a great teammate. And the teams that I work with, they're always asking me like, hey, what's a good book for us to read as a team, right? What can we do together and, read together or use for our season? And there's some really good ones out there, but I was like, this would be, Jerry, like we should write this book. We work with the teams all the time. We have the stories, we have the concepts. And so it's funny story because we actually, So we went back and forth, and I laid out maybe at that point 20 topics, 22 topics, and said, this is, what do you think? And we brainstormed them out, and then we split them up 50-50, and then I put it aside. And I'm like, okay. And I go back to my thing, and I got 2 teenage kids, all that. And then like a week later, Jerry sends me 50 pages and he's like, all right, here you go. I'm like, oh man, I haven't even typed a word yet. And so I was like, I'll have you my stuff in just a couple of days. And then I just started getting up at like 3 a.m. and wrote the beginning of mine. And once you're into it, you're into it. And so the book, it happened. Once it started, it happened pretty quickly.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I'll let you jump in, Chris. And I think, from my standpoint too, like it was easy to read. I could tell like it was written with the intent for teams to do together, or someone to like, hey, just do 5 minutes, read a chapter, read a section, contemplate, reflect, fill it out. Like, and the compound effect of doing that over a period of time, very applicable book. There's mindset stuff in there. There's teammate, there's leadership. It's all, it's well packaged that way. Yeah. Maybe just a high level, and I'll throw it to you, Chris, the 3 sections. Do you want to maybe just elaborate on, the brainstorming of the 3 different sections within the book?
Well, yeah. And, in the book writing process, like people when I've done my books, and I know this goes for Jerry as well, like the last thing you get is the title. Like the last thing you get, I am not the detailed outline. This is exactly, I don't envision the whole thing. I have an idea and we write and whatever. And so we had written a bunch of these sections and a bunch of chapters. And then we sort of said, well, they seem to fall into three categories. Well, one of them is on competing, and one of them is on, leadership, and one of them is on, love and connection. And so that's basically the three things. How do you compete, how do you connect, how do you compete, and then how do you lead? And sometimes leading is how do you follow as well. And so those are the main sections of the book. And it was again, it all sort of just really happened very easily and naturally. We didn't force stuff to be like, oh, I remember like my first book, I had the 7 C's of high performance, and I was like, God, I need another C, so this was very, very natural how it all came together.
Yeah.
Well, the one thing, if I can jump in, and you talk about that being natural, that it's come together, you can see it and sense it just as you kind of peruse and read through, and because like each of the chapters are kind of, they're not long, they're very, and like Cassidy indicated, they're very kind of, I don't say easy to read, but you can kind of, you get lost into it, and then you just keep moving and you want to continue to read. So, I mean, for me, that's the way I found it, and actually started right off the bat with your Messi, your Lionel Messi, Ronaldo kind of comparison in terms of, at the end of the World Cup in Qatar, let alone what's going on with Messi in the world of soccer today and in Inter Miami. But was that more intentional in terms of that based on the timing?
Well, like we write in the introduction that as we were writing this book, we're watching, or especially me, I'm watching the World Cup and paying a lot of attention to it because I'm a soccer guy. And as that's taking place, I just thought, wow, you have this really interesting example of two of the greatest players of all time, right? I think almost anyone would put them both in top 5, right? And the only thing missing from either of their resumes was a World Cup championship, right? They'd each won continental championships. They'd each been multiple time World Player of the Year, all these different things. And so, and here they are, this is their swan song. They're both in their late 30s and this is going to be it. And you had with Argentina, Messi sort of understanding his role within the team, and a team galvanized around him, playing for him, a guy of like, what can I give, right? What can I give in this moment? I'm 37. I'm not going to be the guy who covers the most distance or anything like that, but I can give a lot, right? At the end of it, he scores 7 goals in the World Cup. He's the best player. They win. Ronaldo has just gotten his contract terminated at Manchester United for, behavior unbecoming of a teammate, refusing to sub in a game, walking down a tunnel when he's subbed out, the way he treats his teammates, things like that. And he goes to the World Cup with Portugal, gives an interview about how horrible Manchester United is, so his contract's terminated. Then in Portugal, he gets benched, he storms out, he doesn't start the game they play the best, and then they get eliminated, right? And it was like you had these two people, and one's team was playing for him because he was playing for them, and the other one, was sort of, it's all about me. And I think, the idea behind this book, as you all know, is like we're part of teams our whole life, right? It's not just sports teams, it's our family, it's our community, our church, work, whatever we do, we're part of groups of people working together. And so sport is just this awesome place that we all understand, like, hey, why don't we intentionally teach people how to be a great teammate? And that's what we wanted to do in this book. That's why it's like, how to do this in sports and life. And I think that's why, a lot of people, a lot of schools are like, hey, we're using this for our captain's development, or just tons of college teams have just been, yep, we'll need 30 of those. That's our book for the year. And, big programs, NCAA champions who have just been like, yeah, this is perfect. This is what we want to use this year.
The one thing, if again, sorry, Cass, and part of, to kind of jump on that, like, when you talk about obviously that being a champion teammate, and you kind of define, you kind of jump in the idea of what a champion teammate is. And the one piece I took away is like the winning externally on the scoreboard is a byproduct of the victories within. Is what you kind of wrote in there. And for me, as I was reading that, and I wrote it in my notes, it was like, that's the essence of what growth mindedness is, and the idea. And it seems like teams that understand that ability, that this is, there's a growth component to it, but and you get into it later, and I some of the concepts of the 80 percenters and those kinds of things, I like that concept. But it's an interesting thing in terms of, you say just there, we're captains, and from a leadership group, or kind of understanding that it's not about the individual. And you kind of talk about Jocko Willink as well, and I think that's a pretty cool thing, and pouring into your teammates first. And so you sit there and say, and as I take my takeaway right off the hopper was always about, we're the strength of the group is obviously better than the strength of one. And so again, I don't know if there's a question there, but it's more of a statement on my end as I'm reading this. And you're right, because we all are part of teams in some way, shape, or form in life. And that was my kind of immediate takeaway, let alone the pertinent example. So I just kind of want to make a statement more than anything on that. I thought that was really well, especially on the seeking of the external scoreboard versus the internal growth of a group. I think which is much more important.
Well, one of the things we talk about is this book is about being a champion, not becoming a champion or learning to be so that champion, and you have a sign on your wall that says play like a champion today, right? But it's like, what does that mean? It doesn't mean play like the team that is going to win, because we don't really control that. It's a way of being and approaching everything, from how you treat people to how you lead, how you pick people up, to how you prepare, focus, sleep, all these sort of things, to how you compete and give you the right effort and attitude at practice. It's about embracing all the things you control and taking care of yourself first, right? And optimizing all those things first. And for some of us, X, Y, and Z come naturally. And for other people, those don't come. And so it's like, where are the areas that I can optimize my performance so that I can give more to my team? But it starts with this idea that it's basically this decision that I'm going to be this way, right? With my words, with my actions, from here on out, this is how I'm going to be. And it's not, one of my favorite quotes is the American football coach, Bill Walsh, champions act like champions before they become champions, right? And so it's this idea that we have to commit to a certain way of being and show up and do that every day, with no guarantee that at the end we're going to win the medal or the trophy, but we're still better off being this way. And that's really the theme of the book. And we wanted to, it wasn't like a how-to book. It's, just be.
No, I love that. And, we'll talk more later. I think I might have alluded to, I have my book's coming down the pipeline. A lot of it's about being, and mindset first is kind of the premise of like, be, do, and have. And our society is often way too focused on, okay, well, what do I want to have? What do I want to achieve? And therefore, what do I have to do to achieve it? And like, oh, well, who am I going to be? And my mindset is like last. Like, no, let's make that the priority. Right. And that was like, and that's the intent, a lot of my book that's coming out, but also your book is like being a champion, really expressing the teammate, the leadership, and the compete in a well-rounded. And you've taken like a lot of other literature and books and concepts and your own, obviously lots of your own work, and what's, the strategies and concepts that work the best, compiled it into this nice, easy to digest and usable book. One of the ones that I wanted to dive in here was the Viktor Frankl quote, "Man's Search for Meaning." And I thought that was just a great example when we go back to the Messi versus Ronaldo. And it's just maybe get you to elaborate a bit more on just how, why you picked what quote. And I think it's so important for leaders as they're trying to encourage their teams focus on who they're being and being a champion, as well as the athletes that might be listening, or when encouraging an athlete to be selfless, that it actually still serves them. It's better for them. They feel better. They have more resilience and stuff because they're serving others. So it's like this, healthy relationship. I'll just tee up with that one because I think that was I liked how you used that in the book.
Well, which exact quote is it? Because
so it's around the notice that those who kept their strength from the Nazi death camps, then their sanity the longest, were not those that managed to be clever and get more of their food, but rather they shared and gave selflessly to others, the little food that they had. And that they actually had therefore more strength in their physical and mental conditioning through that selfless and kind behavior. That's that specific quote. Yes.
Exactly. It's funny. You'll see one day when you have your book out and people ask you about it. They're like, on page 210. You're like, oh God, what the heck's on page 210? Right. I listened to this interview with Simon Sinek the other day. He's like, I've never read a single one of my books after I've written them. And that's funny. That's what happens. So this idea of selflessness, right? Or this idea of showing up and saying and asking not what can I get, because this is what society tells us, right? Pop culture and all these messages are like, get what's mine, right? Get my money, get my likes, get my fame. But being part of a highly functioning team is about what can I give. So in sport, I can get playing time, get to play my favorite position, get to, be a starter, get to work hard when I feel like it and slack off, right? That's all like selfishness. And then the opposite of that is what can I give, right? How do I leave the shirt in a better place? I can give my best effort and focus. I can play the position my team needs. I can show up early and stay late. I can help younger players. Even if I'm coming off the bench, I can give a little something more. We have an amazing chapter in there since we're recording this. And we have the Women's World Cup going on in soccer. In 2015 in Canada in the World Cup, there was a U.S. player named Abby Wambach who World Player of the Year, legend, most caps, most goals. And she, in the middle of the World Cup, the coach said, you're not starting anymore. You're going to come off the bench. And she talked about, like, she's like, for 24 hours, I cried. I was angry. I broke stuff. I called my mom. Whatever. And then I realized I had a choice in that moment. Like, I could embrace this and make sure I could give to my team. And when I got on the field, give everything, or I could disrupt the team, right? I could be a terrible teammate. I could sulk and mope and whatever. And because I'm Abby Wambach, everyone's looking at how I'm going to, react or respond in this moment. And she made this conscious decision to be an amazing teammate and yell and scream and support from the bench, and the coach, Jill Ellis, was finally like, would you go sit down there? Like, I can't focus like with you. I'm putting you in, but she says, that was like a defining moment in her life, and how many of her teammates said, in that moment, you really became the leader because you showed all of us in a moment of great personal disappointment, you can still give a ton to the team. And it's stories like that just, for me, we don't highlight enough in sport. We look at the starter and the person who scored all the goals and got all the, the fame, but it's like in these moments where, especially where, an aging star makes the decision to develop the next generation, to be humble, and all that, man, that's powerful leadership right there.
I mean, I love that because it's also recognizing, like, the evolution of where you are and just that legacy piece. I like to talk about the intersection between, like, in the book, you get, there's a lot of references to Steve Kerr. There's great reference to Dean Smith, Greg Popovich. So we got these intersections, obviously from basketball, and Jerry's interaction with Dean Smith, but in the whole concept, I think it's great conceptually and philosophically for us to talk about all these ideas in a podcast. And there are going to be youth coaches, college coaches, whatever, pro coaches out there sitting there saying, well, it won't work in my level, regardless of whatever level. But then I'm reading about Steve Kerr, who's arguably, Golden State's done quite all right under his tutelage, and he did all right as a player. Popovich and the pound the rock stuff, in San Antonio, he's done quite all right. And Dean Smith built a pretty long lasting program at North Carolina. So can you talk about that, the intersection, let's say, of their philosophies and how they, how that they've impacted this, some of the discussions that are in this book?
Jerry has this great saying. He says, I'm like a flute, and I take in all this knowledge becomes like the wind, the air, and I try to like blow it out and make it sound pretty, right? But I'm always synthesizing all the things from the people I've learned from, right? So Jerry's been at this for 50 years. And he was doing sports psychology when no one was doing sports psychology, and he connected with people. His first book was one called Thinking Body, Dancing Mind, about sort of the intersection of Western psychology and Eastern thought, and the importance of the inner game. And Phil Jackson saw it and gave it to a guy named Michael Jordan and said, I think this will help. Right. And then the Bulls read it. Right. And one of the guys on that team was a guy named Steve Kerr. Right. And so, he got to know him then. And then, that it, in professional sport, it travels. Teammates are like, hey, well, who are you working with? What are you doing? And hey, I'm doing this stuff, and it's really helpful. And, Phil Jackson was certainly an innovator, and had a guy named George Mumford in there doing mindfulness and meditation with the Bulls, and then with the Lakers and stuff like that. So it's amazing we get to talk to these incredible coaches, and then plenty of coaches that maybe win on the collegiate level that are not household names, but they've done incredible work year after year, 20 national titles in Division III tennis or something like that. They're unbelievable coaches, and they're athletic directors. And so what's fun is, like, at the end, people are like, oh yeah, that all sounds nice, but does it work? And it's like, well, yeah, here's all these championships, right? 39 NCAA titles and professional titles and stuff. It does work. Right. But it requires, coaches and the leadership of the team to also sort of buy in of like, we want to do this. Now, no one would ever make the argument that, going to the weight room is stupid, right? Like, or that doesn't help. And no one, if you showed up at your team and said, oh, yeah, I hired a fitness coach to get me sharp in the off season, people, no one would go, why are you doing that? What's wrong with you? Right. It doesn't mean that you're weak. It means I want to get stronger. There's still a little bit of a stigma, and Cassidy, I mean, you might live this there's this little bit of a stigma of like, oh, I'm working with a mental performance coach. I'm working with someone who is helping me optimize that part of my game as well. But we're getting through that now. Right. And so more and more people are doing it. And what we're doing is we just take these coaches who have thought about this and used this for many, many years, and they used it as a competitive advantage when no one else was doing it. And they openly talk about it. Like, yeah, this was an advantage for us, that in that tie game in, the final period or the last quarter or whatever, right? Our team had a little more connection, a little more belief, a little more trust or whatever. Why wouldn't you optimize those things as a coach as well? instead of so many people just leave them to chance. And so all the work we do is about, don't leave this stuff to chance, right? Just go for it and optimize that area as well. We had this guy on the podcast, Alan Goldberg, who's also a, longtime famous sports psychologist. And, he said, in practice and everything, and, his number was, it's 85%, technical and tactical and 15% mental. He goes, but once the competition starts, it's 100% mental. Right. And it's true. So why wouldn't you work on that?
Yeah. That's why we call this Beyond the X's and O's.
Exactly.
And I would argue or state even it's just the magic of sport and of life, like the meaningful stuff is beyond the X and O's. It's not just working hard, but how can we work smarter, more creative together, the less tangible pieces of the puzzle that, which can be a huge competitive advantage. And as more people are embracing it, you're falling behind if you're not as a coach and an athlete and in any area of life. And I think from a just a standpoint of like, it's also just makes it more meaningful. Like, even if you don't end up winning or you fall short, it's like, it still makes the season and being an athlete more meaningful as the coach, as the athlete, etc. So the point that I wanted to make that kind of ties into this and early on, you also quoted Anson Dorrance and from The Man Watching, which I remember reading that book and I was like, no, that's a cool thing going on there. And the line and the quote there that I love, and you talk about like being a champion, is the true vision of champion is someone bent over, drenched in sweat at the point of exhaustion when no one else is watching, right? So it's like not doing, it's just pushing yourself to that extent. Like that's mindset, team, the beyond the X and O stuff that like, that's what we're looking to cultivate within, this intrinsic drive. And I think it's such a vivid image too. And he talks about who was the player?
Mia Hamm.
Mia Hamm, right? So Mia Hamm, most famous players of all time, is like drives by like just to exhaustion. Sees it's like that's the vision. Like that's what it means to be a champion. So I don't know if you want to just elaborate on that, because I always found that, I think I read his book like 15 years ago or whatever it was now, and it's like that still, clicks for me.
Yeah, and Mia Hamm at that point had just won her third NCAA title or something in soccer and was the player of the year, and already a full international player and top on internationally. And there she is right after the season doing the work by herself at 6 a.m. right? That's the vision of a champion. That was his note. And so that was a note he wrote and stuck in her locker of just sort of the keep going. Right. And this is this is the myth in the world we live in, right, of Instagram and highlight reels and YouTube and TikTok. Like, we see front stage, we see the performance, we don't see the backstage hours, the struggle, the failure, the injuries, all that stuff we don't see. We just see the bright under the bright lights, and then we're told, well, I want that. Right. Most people don't want that, because once you know what it takes to get that, you don't want that, because it sucks and it's hard and you're going to suffer and suffer and suffer. And this is we have a huge disconnect between what it takes to be excellent and what it takes to get there. And then parents not recognizing that my child doesn't have those qualities, which is perfectly all right. Like most kids aren't going to make it because you gave them bad genetics, right? So that's where it starts, right? Their ceiling is never going to be high enough. But even if you did that, then they don't have that drive and that desire. And I know, Cassidy, you did a lot of work with Joe and on your PhD on like, what are the things that gets you to that place? I mean, those people are unicorns. Right. They are not normal when you're that driven, right? The Messis, the Ronaldos, the Mia Hamms, the people who just show up and do it again and again and again. So the captain of the U.S. team, women's team in the World Cup that's going on right now, Lindsey Horan. I first met her when she was 13, and her coach was a good friend, and I was coaching a girls team in the same age, in the same sort of organization, and we used to share players and stuff. And but I was rooming with him, and he, and we're in our hotel, and she comes with some teammates and knocks on the door, 13 years old, and asks about team meal or something like that or whatever, right? Just your typical blonde hair, ponytail, 13-year-old, and closes the door. And the coach, Tim, he'd coached the national team and, a lot of top players. And he said, see her? She's going to be one of the best players ever. Right there. And, and you're always like, yeah, whatever. And he's like, no, she's different. And it was her mentality. He's like, we never had to tell Lindsay to practice. We had to tell her to go home. Right. She would show up with her team and then practice with the boys and then stay after. He goes, I would enforce her I would tell her mom, she is not allowed to go near any field today. She needs a day off. Right. That's how driven Lindsay was. Right. And she was the first U.S. women's player. She skipped college and signed with Paris Saint-Germain when she was 18 years old. Right. She moved to a foreign country and learned a different language to pursue this. Right. She's not normal. She's not normal. So I think this is the one of the things that we have to teach. These are the qualities, and then we have to connect reality of getting there with just, how about just be a certain way and enjoy the journey. And whatever happens, because you could do everything right and have all the tools and blow your ACL twice, and you're not going to get there either. So there's a little bit of luck involved too.
Very similar to the story of Christian Pulisic that you mentioned, right? In terms of his dad and him moving over to Germany, and basically, once if the dream isn't your dream or whatever, we'll go home, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it clearly, obviously, that drive, that passion that he has, and I was often through the minor hockey circles in the Southern Ontario region here, the question would always come to me, hey, Chris, like, what's the biggest skill or the best skill that, players should develop? And I just said, if you can foster the love of the game in your child, that's the best thing right there. Everything else will flow out of that. But it's hard to really foster that love of the game, I think. And, it's, you just created, you mentioned, Lindsay, and then, obviously Christian Pulisic, and there's all kinds of athletes, obviously, but the one thing I like about what you said too, about wanting that in terms of athletes or parents or coaches, but it's yet, what it takes to get to there. I always ask, the secondary question is when they say, I want that, I always say, do you really?
Mm-hmm.
Because now you sit there and you dig a little deeper to understand, okay, this is what is required to do that. Now we get the real crux of it. Why do you want that? And I think that's where, for me, I love like studying and reading and having conversations like this, because it really becomes the separators between those who do move on, excel, and challenge themselves. To that point, I want to get you to talk a little bit about Messiah College. And sort of, because the reason I want you to get into that, because it came under the chapters, setting standards, not the rules. And, I remember when Mike Krzyzewski wrote the book, the Golden Standard, and it was about that, setting standards, not rules. And I've got it on my bookshelf and read it. And it was, kind of an epiphany for me as a younger coach, because it was always, for me as a younger coach, it was about the rules. Yeah, I got to set rule. I'm in charge. I'm the guy. But then, as you start to realize as you get older and understanding, is empowering your players a little bit too through the process. And so if you don't mind, just if you can talk about Messiah College.
Yeah. And this idea in general is, number one, right, people who weigh in are more likely to buy in, right? So if you can give your athletes a voice in what's happening, they're going to support the idea of these standards and this idea, right? So Messiah College is a small NCAA Division III. It's a Christian school in Pennsylvania. But their men's and women's soccer program had, between say 2002 and 2019 or 2020 had won like 16 combined NCAA titles, right? So at Division III, there's no scholarships. There's no things like that. How do you have such continued excellence on that level? And the founder of the program, the godfather of coaching there, was a guy named Dave Brandt, who's then his former players became the women's coach. And now Brad McCarty's the coach there on the men's side, who played for him and was his assistant. And it was always about playing to a standard and playing to a higher purpose. And so, I have friends who played at Messiah, and they always talk about this, that it was like, you didn't come in to preseason unfit, not because the coach was going to be mad, because you didn't want to let your teammates down. Wow. Right. So you're fighting for your fitness, and your behavior, and all this is about don't let my teammate down. And so I'm going to take care of myself. I'm going to be in shape. I'm going to be prepared. I'm going to go to the gym in the off season and lift and play futsal and do all these other things to get better. That is massively important, right? If the only accountability is to the coach, whatever. If the only anyone who has kids knows that the more rules you make, the more rules will be broken, right? That's what kids do. They test the rules, they break it. How can I push this boundary, right? But a standard is something that you aspire to, right? That I am trying to be the best version of myself. And so in my experience, and in Jerry's experience, right, the best programs that do things not just a one-off, but are consistently excellent, have an incredibly high standard. And it's not for everybody, right? A lot of people come and well, let's just lower the standard. No, you're in the wrong place. We're not doing the wrong thing. You're in the wrong place. And we're seeing a lot of this now, I think, sadly, in college sports, where kids without the love of the game end up in a program with high standards because it's a big name. That was always their dream, was to achieve this. And they get there and they realize, I don't want to put in the work. All right. I don't have 40 hours a week for this. I don't want to skip the parties on the weekend. I don't want to show up at 6 a.m. in the weight room. Right. They're not willing to meet the standard. And then when there is consequences of that, they don't start, they don't play, they don't travel, whatever, they're going and complaining to ADs about toxic environments or things like that, right? And in no way, shape, or form does anyone condone abusive behavior, but I see a lot of people complaining about high standards that they don't feel like meeting, and then they go, oh, this is making me really uncomfortable that I actually have to be in shape, right? And earn my scholarship or whatever. And so we have a big problem right now, I think, in collegiate athletics, because we're treating it, in universities in general, we've switched from treating people as students to be challenged and pushed and made uncomfortable. Now we treat them like customers, where they're always right. And if they have a complaint, we have to fix their complaint instead of just saying, maybe you're not the right customer. And this is a problem.
Yeah, I love the tease up one of the quotes from Kirby Smart, the two-time national champ football coach at Georgia. He had a quote saying, as long as you don't have entitlement in your program, you've got a shot. So I just love that is, they're not so worried about, what can be given to me, but what can I give? And they're focused on who am I being? And I just kind of clicked, like, setting standards for who you want to be or how you want to show up and operate. And then you might have rules for what they do and don't do with consequences. And there's goals for the achievement, but like start with the standards for who do you want to be? And is there even a fit? And, but a lot of athletes aren't even focused on that. They're just, well, I want the result without putting in the effort, and it doesn't add up. Mm-hmm. And the entitlement and all the kind of problems that come from that.
And oftentimes, right, as a youth, they've been bigger, faster, stronger, or whatever. And so they've coasted, they've been able to have success without the investment. And now all of a sudden they're surrounded by people who have the same tools and who are invested. And it's psychologically very, it's earth shattering for people, as right? Like, and they haven't gotten the reps in the hard work and the discipline over the years because it's just come too easy for too long.
Yeah. And I'll just comment quick, and I have a question here after, but I would say, I don't know the exact number, I can go look, but like the majority of pro athletes I work with were dominant as a youth, and they never had to work on their mindset, their mental game, the learning to accept and deal with struggle and challenge and commit to is just their talent. They were so talented. They could they didn't need the mental game mindset, focus on who they're being to support it. They could just talent their way through almost from the sheer capability. So it's actually quite a common reason why a pro athlete will reach out, because also it's like they get shocked with the pain of oh wow, like I chant, like now they start getting in the noise at that level.
I'm surrounded by me.
Yeah.
Like I'm surrounded by me, and I don't have these tools. And what's interesting is how, getting to like that just, pro, but not all-star level, right? There's people like that, but that's sort of, there's a researcher in the UK, Dave Collins, calls them the super champions, the multiple time gold medal winners, or the all-star pro, the all-pro players, all-star players, internationals, full internationals, whatever it is. Like how many of them, they had trauma and they had struggles when they were younger. A lot of them were born later in the calendar year, so they weren't bigger, faster, stronger, and they had to sort of, just fight to hold their place and stay on the team and all that. And then all of a sudden, all those skills around resilience and grit and work ethic, then they hit puberty a little later, then they grow a little later, and then they have all these other tools. And the people who, were always bigger, faster, stronger, older don't. And so it's really interesting. A lot of people get to that point that you're talking about, and they never break through unless they go to someone like you, and they're like, oof, they at least recognize I'm missing something from my toolbox here that these guys around me developed for some reason and I didn't. Please help. A lot of people just drop out of the system at that point.
Yeah, no, it's huge. And so I want to jump to my question though, because I think environment is such a key piece to motivation, mindset, etc. And so that's one environmental factor, is how you, like, what level and interacting. If you're always winning all the time, it's an environmental factor. One you alluded to, and we don't have to dive into, but like social media and being on phones, and that environmental factor that creates this expectation around results, and success just looks like that, and I should be there really quickly. And well, that's a fantasy that then will demotivate most people. They'll give up. Well, what's the point if I can't get there really quickly? The ones though that come up into the book, and there was a couple big points. One was the line from Clemson football, like the safe seat, around like being able to share and be vulnerable. Same and similarly, like pet the dragon. Never heard that story before. Really like that. I thought that was, hey, let's go deal with the struggle, the noise, so that it doesn't get bigger. Just go pet the dragon, like calm down. I was like, just those. And you think of also even just mindset, teams, everything, the ability to be vulnerable, the ability to create a safe space. I know Chris, have lots to say on that as well in questions. I think it's just so important as coaches, as leaders, as people, high performers, athletes, learning to go to the noise, go to the things that are harder to talk about, is actually gives us that strength. I don't know if you want to just elaborate on that, because that's a huge environmental piece that our culture is getting better at, but I would say is really struggling with, and which is why people, and go back to one of your first points, people do think mental performance and mindset is way more accepted. Still a lot of hesitation. Still people are afraid to be vulnerable and go and actually have the conversation and look at their thoughts and feelings and deal with it and voice that. So even in a private one-on-one setting, it's growing. But I think that's a huge piece that was touched on well in the book. So I want to give you the opportunity to dive in.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's very true. And obviously, like, Brene Brown's done some amazing work in this area around vulnerability. You know, it's funny, in conversations with Steve Kerr, he always makes it a point to, he always points out to us, he's like, being vulnerable as a leader is incredibly important, but vulnerability without competence is just, you're just not good, right? Like, you still need competence. And so, you know, well, I was vulnerable. Yeah, but you know what? You didn't put in the work. You're not good enough. It's nice that you're vulnerable, but you still need the ability, right? So he's very point. He goes, you know, you'd be as vulnerable as you want. If you don't know basketball, they'll throw you out of the locker room in a second. And so, so I think that's an important part of it. But, you know, and I also think women's teams have a greater understanding of this because the way they're raised and culturalized than men's teams do, the importance of that camaraderie and vulnerability. And so something like Clemson football, right, you sort of have to really force this to happen. But then, hey, this is a team, and you know, this is a safe place for you to share who you are as a human being and what is driving you, right? And when you have that team, and I realize that, you know, this is what's going on in Chris's life or Cassidy's life or John's life right now, those things affect performance, right? And I can be more empathetic, and I can, you know, go and say, you know, hey, you know, your parents are getting divorced, or, you know, your dad's got cancer or whatever, and that's a real struggle. Like, hey, man, I know there's a lot going on in your world, and you know, you don't seem here today. Come on, let's go. Let's pick it up. Let's have a great practice. I got your back today, right? Those are really powerful things for bringing a team together and you know, wanting people in your foxhole, if you will. And so we can't ever, you know, as coaches, like, we want to create that environment where people are willing to share these things, and not hide them, because it's also a lens for us to coach them as well, right? If I know this is going on in someone's world, their performance today, their behavior today might, you know, is probably affected by this, so I should know about it. And I think this is the new frontier at high level sport that we have to figure out how to navigate. And certainly in the US, and I don't know how it works as much in Canada, but you know, we have a thing in the US called HIPAA, which is the medical privacy. So oftentimes, like, an athlete will be going to see the psychologist or the therapist or the counseling because of something going on in their world, and the coach has no idea. So they're in treatment for a year, 6 months, whatever it is, around an issue. And I'm just coaching them like I normally coach them, without maybe the empathy or the understanding of what's going on in their world, right? And then they break down, and the psychologist knew about it, and whoever he or she reports to knew about it. But the person who had the most effect of that person's environment, the coach, is operating blind. And so how do we connect those two things, I think, is really, really, really important. Because I think most coaches, they want to do best by their kids, right? They want to do best by their players. And so, you know, I don't know, I'm probably a little bit off topic, but I think these are the challenges that today's coach is facing right now. It would be like, you know, a player goes to the training room and they've got an injured knee, and the athletic trainer is not allowed to tell the coach that they've got an injured knee and they're going to need some sort of modified whatever until this injury is gone. Well, they've got something going on, and the coach operates blind. It's a big challenge. I don't have the answer for it, but sport performance is going to have to solve that.
Yeah, no, that's a huge point. I'll let you jump in, Chris.
No, I know why you did. I don't want to belabor, because I'm like, my big thing now lately is really delving into the psychological safety component, you know, both athletically and then business wise. Because I just think, you know, there's a lot being written about it, you know, and rightfully so. Just from an organizational behavior perspective, I just think that, and it's kind of important in its understanding. Obviously, if it's done with the proper controls and proper measures, psychological safety for employees and or athletes, I think they can feel empowered. And it goes back to then diving into the standards, as you mentioned earlier. I did want to, before we wrap up here, I did want to be able to understand, in one of the chapters you talked about the idea of cohesion and unity, and the concept of cohesion and unity. And I embrace the word cohesion because years ago, and it's funny because a player who I coached, his dad was a sports psychologist who actually did a lot of work with Cass in his master's degree, Paul Dennis. I'd bounce things off of him. He was kind of like a mentor to me, and I used to use the word team chemistry. And he said, get that word out of your name. Don't use the word chemistry, use the word cohesion, because chemistry is something that you hope that things can build together, but cohesion is something that you're always evolving and growing. So when I read about that, and I think it might have been in Being an Elevator or whatever it was, and the idea of cohesion and unity and being able to being a champion teammate is all about cohesion and unity and creating a culture of that. Is there something that you can elaborate on that?
Looks like we lost him here.
Oh, frozen.
We'll take a pause here. See if we get him back.
And are your highest performers, right? They show up early, they stay late, they do all the things.
Hey, John. Well,
you cut now.
Yeah, you cut out. So just restart the answer to that question. We'll just give it a second here, and then you got the full question? Yeah, we didn't hear the beginning of that answer at all. So,
no, okay. I saw
we'll just cut that out.
I saw your faces were like, I'm like, wow, they're just so tuned into my answer here. They're not even moving.
Yeah, we'll cut this out.
All right, perfect. All right. So, that's a really great question. This idea of cohesion and unity is so important. And the more you have everyone pushing together, doing the same thing, the more people are on board, the better off you're going to be. And, we talked in the book about this idea of the 10-80-10 rule, that in any group, you have 10% are your high performers, your highest performers. They show up early, they stay late, they meet the standards, they do everything. And then you have the bottom 10% that, don't do anything. They're always late. They're not bought in. They don't work hard. And then you have 80% in the middle. Now, a lot of coaches say, well, yeah, but what if your most talented player is in that bottom 10%? That happens, right? But sometimes they're not. Sometimes, what I say with the teams that I work with is, who is an 80%er, right? That if he or she became a top 10, right, they would make the biggest difference to our team performance, right? And because they're talented, they also carry a lot of influence, right? Every team I've ever worked with can name 2 or 3 people like that. Yeah, boom, boom, boom. And then, what happens is, oftentimes as coaches or team captains, we sit there going, God, I really wish, Cass would show up early or stay late or work a little harder. It'd make a difference. And what we say is, all right, who's got him, right? And then we make accountability. So I'll take one of the captains and say, she belongs to you, right? He's yours, right? When we meet here again in a couple of weeks, I'm going to ask specifically, how has this person done, right? And now it's not like, oh, they're still not coming. Then it's like, well, why not, Chris? Because Cass was your responsibility, right? Do you need help, right? But what's amazing is, because I watch from afar, right? Most of my work, I'll go in person in preseason and I'll watch the games and stuff. And you'll have these conversations and all of a sudden you see that player we talked about shining, right? Because they've had a good week of practice and then they get in the game and they feel more cohesion and they feel more belonging and they understand their importance, right? And I remember one of the teams I worked with, was a men's soccer team this fall, and I had this question. They named a kid, right? And I knew, I mean, he was the kid in my mind, but I'm not out there every day, right? So I said, okay, let's go get him. And all of a sudden he scored in 4 of the next 5 games, and we won a championship. And it was just like, all right, there you go. Right. Like that's it. And that little bit of intent makes a huge difference. And so I think that this is the type of thing that we wrote this book so that coaches could be more intentional about these things, and so that teammates and captains could be more intentional and understand them. And maybe we've defined them a little bit and given them words to describe things that they feel. And it's like, this is what this is, and here's maybe ways that you can do it, right? And it's why at the end of every chapter, we have this section called Optimize Your Performance, where you write notes and you answer questions for yourself, and you sort of get a path forward as a group, right? So it promotes group discussion. 15 minutes, you could do a chapter in 15 minutes, 1 day a week in practice, right? And just really get stronger in a lot of areas over the course of a season.
Great.
Yeah,
That's great.
I absolutely love it. And I think my final question point and I think it helps summarize is near the end of the book, the idea of going slower to arrive sooner. And I just think in our culture, particularly, something I've struggled with is like, I want to go fast. I want to get there. Just like, let me get through the whole book now. Let me get all these results now. And when we do that, that can obviously lead to a lot of challenges, and particularly learning to instead embrace the patience, and whether it's this book or mindset or other concepts. So I just wanted to give you the opportunity, maybe, that last question is around just the importance of being patient with this book or anything else. And with, it's season after season, and as coaches or leaders and athletes, just the importance of that principle to go slower in order to arrive sooner.
Yeah, there's a great, I think we quote the African proverb: if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Right. And again, I think we live and grow up in this world where we see the end result and everyone wants to get there and they want to skip all the steps. Right. Yeah. So we want to win a championship, but we really don't want to go to the weight room 8 months before the season starts. Right. We just want to win it. Right. And it doesn't work that way. Right. And so this is the thing that we just have to get, is like, just be patient, show up. If you control the things that you can control, right, and you show up day after day, and you make sure that, and if you have a great team, because what a great teammate does is he helps me be better on my bad days. Right. And if my bad days aren't as bad as they used to be, right, and I'm encouraged to give a little bit more in the days when I'm not feeling it or I'm a little distracted, and then we as a group make this commitment to not string any bad days together. So yesterday was terrible, we're not doing that again, so let's get here, focus, let's go. Right, we're going to be just fine. Right. And we're going to maximize the potential we have. It doesn't mean we're going to win the trophy at the end of the year, because someone might have more talent and ability and all these sort of things, but we're going to give ourselves the best shot. And that's what we call being a champion, right? Is you do that again and again. And at the end of that season, you can have this satisfaction of, that was a good year. Right. And our team got along, and we feel great about each other, and we can feel pretty great about our season. And we didn't win the NCAA title, or maybe we didn't win our conference, but man, we squeezed every drop of juice out of that. And those are the seasons and the teammates and the people that you remember your whole life.
Yeah, I love that. Chris, any final thoughts, questions as we wrap up here?
No, I mean, I appreciate that. And certainly I keep reiterating, the book is obviously, a lot of great stories on sports, but it's a life book too, as you mentioned earlier. And I think very applicable for any aspect, a parent, a business person, obviously a coach, an athlete. I think it's great. And certainly, I think it's well worth the read for a lot of people out there. So yeah, I appreciate you coming on, John, and talking about it.
Thank you.
Yeah. So maybe just some final thoughts slash where people should go and contact you, etc. Again, the book, The Champion, Teammate, Timeless Lessons to Connect, Compete, and Lead in Sports and Life by Jerry Lynch and John O'Sullivan. Thanks for joining us. Maybe just some final, we want people to go buy the book. I think it's great. Teams can buy it, etc. Maybe just speak a little
Yeah.
promo here.
Yeah. So, if the book's on Amazon and stuff like that. We actually, the day we're recording this is the paperback just came out as well, which also helps with expanded distribution of it. So now it'll be available in Australia and whatever. It was just available from Amazon.com and the hardback. So that's cool. And it's also now available in Barnes and Noble and Books A Million and where Powell's, any place else you buy your books, or will be very, very soon. So we just got that out. And then my website's just changingthegameproject.com. And that's the place to go. I think on the book, there's, championteammate.com is just where you can go. And that's a place to buy the book. And also to email me if you want to do like discounted bulk book orders as well, to get them for your team. The reason we self-published this was that we could do lower cost discounted books, because when you go through a publisher, you really don't save very much money. So that's a great way to reach out, and happy to help people out with that.
Yeah. Well, thanks again so much for joining us, and we'll be chatting again soon, I'm sure.
Awesome. Thank you both. This was super fun. I do a lot of these, but this was really, really enjoyable.